Pause. Okay, excellent. So you should all have had that little notification to say that we're recording. And like I say, I won't use any of the readings before getting your guys' permission, but please feel free to email us if you'd specifically not like me to use your section. Please also feel free to leave your cameras on if you can. It's always nice to see more faces. Okay, so this is the third year that we've been running Superlative. And when, what feels like a long time ago now, I first started sending my own work out for publication, Angela France, one of my previous university creative writing lecturers, told me that a surefire way to measure the quality of a publication is to see who you've been published alongside. And based on that advice, as I mentioned earlier on, all of our contributors this year and every year can be incredibly proud that their pieces have been selected for publication amidst some very, very tough competition. And I mentioned this to those who were online earlier on. Last year, we received more than twice as many submissions as in 2020. And we ran 3 competitions instead of 1, and we had more contributors and more readers. And we hoped to double that new figure again this year, but I was delighted to be proven completely wrong in that prediction. So for this year, the 2022 Futures issue, we received over 10 times more submissions than in 2021. And this was obviously phenomenal. And we're very grateful to everyone who submitted. And to all of you and to everybody who watches this recording afterwards, very many congratulations. And I obviously wish you as much success as possible in your future writing careers. Hopefully, as I've mentioned, all the contributor copies have arrived by now. I know maybe about 80% have, and the rest are hopefully still on the way in the post. I know the postage abroad can be a little bit hit and miss, especially with the strikes, but I'll paste a link to Superlative's website into the chat, and the journal's available to buy both in print and as an ebook. And thank you very much. I know some people have already ordered copies, but please do support the journal if you can. Most of our staff are volunteers and put a lot of time and a lot of effort into running the journal for its contributors, because it is about you guys, it is about the contributors. And we've got attendees and speakers from all over the globe tonight. So the UK, America, Canada, Australia, Czech Republic, Japan, and India, I believe. So people will be dipping in and out over the course of the evening according to time zones. And I hope tonight won't be the last that we hear from this year's contributors. We've got some previous contributors who've been successful once again, which is an extra impressive feat considering the sheer volume of submissions we received this year. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping before I do actually stop talking, I promise, and hand over to the first speaker. So all will hopefully run smoothly, but if for whatever reason we lose the connection, I'll restart the meeting using the same details. So please just log back in and hopefully all will be well. As we hear from the contributors over the course of the evening, please keep your microphones muted so we can just avoid any interference. And to help the evening flow and avoid everyone muting and unmuting all the way through, we'll save up our applause for the end, and we can toast and applaud and eat cake for all the contributors together at the end. So I'll introduce each speaker with a very short bio, and speakers will be reading about 5-minute excerpts from their pieces, and the full versions of which obviously can be read in the journal, unless it's maybe a mini saga or a flash fiction piece, in which case they might manage to get through the whole piece in 5 minutes. We've had a couple of readers pull out last minute, but they've asked if I can read on their behalf. So you might have a little bit more of my voice than you'd like, but at least we can get their pieces for the recording. I'll also paste website links and social media handles into the chat as contributors are reading. And all the contributors, please feel free to add any additional links yourselves if I've overlooked any, but I think hopefully I've got them all from your bios. So I'll post Superlative's website into the chat for you. And in fact, I'll do that now so that I know that I've done it. There we go, for when we have the first contributor. So without any further ado, I'll hand you over to our first speaker. So I wanted to kick off this evening with a recitation from Jeffrey Feingold, so author of Rich Girl, this year's short story competition winner. So Jeffrey is a writer of short stories and essays in Boston. His work appears in magazines such as the International, Intrepid Times, and The Bark. And The Bark has published many acclaimed authors, including the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet Mary Oliver. Jeffrey's work has also been published by award-winning literary reviews and journals such as The Pinch, Wilderness House Literary Review, and Hare's Paw Literary Journal. Jeffrey's stories about family, about the push-pull of heritage versus assimilation, and about love, loss, regret, and forgiveness reveal a sense of absurdity tempered by a love of people and their quirky ways. So thank you very much, Jeffrey, and I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ross. I'm going to try to read a short passage. I noticed a lot of the words in my story were transcribed to the proper English spelling, which is one of the joys an American and submitting to an English journal. So, but I think I can still read them in my terrible Americanized English. This story is all about the future. Actually, the name of the story, "Rich Girl," is a reference to the protagonist's son, a daughter, excuse me, who features in the story. The protagonist and their daughter are at the opening of the story. Well, actually, I wrote a little overview. The story opens and later closes on the same scene at a theater on Broadway, where the protagonist David and his daughter Grace are watching a revival of the musical Fiddler on the Roof. And then there's a flashback, first to the day before, when the two characters drop off cigars and a new pillow for David's grandfather, Alexei, who is suffering from dementia in a nursing home. Alexei was once the family patriarch, and the connection to the old country and traditions, just as the milkman in the musical Tavia was as well. And then there's a discussion in an even more extended flashback about how each generation in this particular family has been further and further removed from the traditions to which the grandfather was so closely linked. So that you get to the point now today, several generations forward, where the rich girl of the story mistakenly thinks that the song "If I Were a Rich Man" in the musical Fiddler on the Roof was stolen and bastardized from Gwen Stefani, who had a song called "A Rich Girl" on her first album, all about growing up in the hood in LA. And so that's a bit of the context. So here we are in the opening scene the day before the Broadway show. Excuse me. Grace and David walked into the lobby. David had the new pillow under his left arm and the blunts are a certain type of cigar the grandfather smokes, the blunts under his right. They rode the main elevator up many floors, exited the elevator, began trudging down endless, narrow, windowless, dank hallways, each one identically papered with sepia tone wallpaper, following arrows, numbers. Turn left, walk, walk, walk. Turn right, walk, walk, walk. Left, right, past hundreds of manila-colored apartment doors, each nameless, identical, save for the diminutive black plastic apartment numbers on each. It felt more like prison than home, David always thought. There must be a retiree like me in every nursing home in America, I guess, David said, riffing on lines from his favorite flick. I'm the guy who can get it for you. Garcia Vega blunts, a bottle of Mogan David, a bag of weed, if that's your thing. What are you talking about, Dad? Grace asked. Does great grandpa smoke weed? No, honey, blunts, just blunts. 1881. The little light by the keyhole of room 1881 was green. David sighed. He knocked, pressing his right ear on the door when there was no response. He heard voices, a man's, a woman's. Man, look, I don't know what's bothering you, but don't take your bedroom problems out on me. Woman, I have no bedroom problems. There's nothing in my bedroom that bothers me. Man, oh, that's too bad. David and Grace looked at each other. Grace shrugged her shoulders. David knocked on the door again. The man said, the State Department could use her. What a party girl she'd make in Moscow. David turned the handle. The door was unlocked. He opened the door a wedge. He and Grace sidled in. Smells of urine, Lysol, peaches. Great grandpa? Grace asked. Alexei was in his chair, an unlit blunt dangling between two wrinkled yellow willow fingers. He looked so small, David thought. Alexei was watching the television, sitting atop the desk on the other side of the little room. His chair was nothing like the lush, plush, once but not future king's majestic armchair in the living room of his house. No, this was a square, squat, steel frame affair with a slim, thin black vinyl seat pad. Perhaps, David thought, the chair used to strap in convicted prisoners for their executions at Shawshank State Penitentiary. David had desperately wanted to move Alexei into an upscale retirement home at the time of the move, but the money wasn't there. David just didn't have it. He was barely squeaking by as a sole practitioner accountant, while also bleeding cash on attorneys for his divorce, which dragged on as interminably as a frigid Russian winter. Though he'd seen it many times, David routinely surveyed the sum of Alexei's apartment. One twin bed, two twin sheets, two white pillows, one small television, one executioner's chair, one small steel nightstand, one Torah black leather cover, one lamp, olive drab lampshade, two open empty boxes of Garcia Vega blunts, one clear glass ashtray taken from Alexi's home, two framed photographs, one of Alexi's wife, Edna, one of Grace. Pillow Talk was playing on the television. The man David and Grace heard from outside the room was Rock Hudson, the woman Doris Day, a romantic comedy from 1959, the year of David's birth. Alexei looked away from the movie, glanced at David and Grace. His burnt caramel brown eyes raced wildly around the room, then settled unsettlingly on David. "You're here to kill me," Alexei said matter-of-factly. "Am I going to see you tonight?" Rock Hudson asked. "I'd love to, Rex," Day replied, "but I already have a date." "You're here to kill me," Alexei shouted this time. "Grandpa, it's me," David said. "David, your grandson. You're here to kill." "No, I'm not," Doris Day said. "And I ain't the kind of guy who'd ask you to," Rock pointed out. David placed the pillow and blunts on the foot of the bed, then walked a few feet to the television, turned the power knob off. "I'm David," he said. "David." Alexei stared at David's face. He leaned his gaunt frame forward in the chair. The unlit blunt nestled in his wispy willow fingers, flesh so paper thin it seemed to David that with a whoosh of air it would crinkle, crack open, slipped to the antiseptic white floor. David, it's you?" "Yes, Grandpa, I'm David. I'm here with your great-granddaughter." And then I'll flash forward a little bit. David instantly knew he'd made a terrible mistake bringing Grace. He felt the shame of his stupidity. He'd hoped for her to have just one more visit. During his own visits in the few months since the move, David was startled by Alexei's rapid decline. Sometimes lucid, conversational, sometimes not knowing David. Every time, the desperate urge to hide. David's father had told him the stories, how Russians had murdered men, women, children in Alexei's village in Ukraine. Dozens murdered after rumors that Jews had used blood from Christian children in their rituals. When pogroms began in nearby villages, Alexei's parents cut a large hole in their mattress. As the pogroms got closer to their own village, they'd hide Alexei, just a few years old, in the mattress hole, then make the bed until the Cossacks departed. Many times, David's father told him, his grandfather hid in the darkness hour after hour, buried in the mattress. He was there one night when his parents were murdered. An uncle fled the village and brought Alexei to America. And then it kind of flashes forward to the present time again, talking about this, where he is today with this dementia. And now this disease, this vile dementia, in its own way as cruel as any Cossack. This disease which took everything from him, which took everything good, and it kind of goes on from there. I don't want to run out of time. David is, David mumbled out loud. No, David knew what to do, what he had to do, but how could he? "Know what, Dad?" Grace asked. David did not speak. "Dad?" "Grace, why don't you wait in the car, sweetheart? I just want to talk with the nurse. I'll be right along." So the daughter leaves and goes down to the car. He watches her amble down the hallway, getting swallowed up in the maze of corridors. Then he rings a buzzer and a nurse comes in, and the nurse confirms what David feared, which is that his grandfather is just like this every day or night. Thrown back in time 50 or whatever, 70 years to when he was hiding in this hole in the mattress. The dementia has sort of played with time, and his grandfather's reliving this nightmare now daily. So David, coming back to David, he closed the door behind her, the nurse, locked the deadbolt from the inside. He slipped the executioner's chair over to the door and jammed it under the doorknob, since he knew the nurse had a master key. He stood by the door, his mind somewhere else. It might have been a minute or few, it might have been a century. Then at last he said quietly to himself, no. He walked slowly to the foot of the bed. He glanced at Alexei, still under the white sheet, completely invisible, hiding, cowering from Cossacks, as he did now every day, every night. No, David murmured, no. He wouldn't let an animal suffer so. He picked up the new pillow, still encased in its plastic sleeve, from the foot of the bed. He stood next to Alexei, clutching this, the best pillow he could buy, the pillow he'd hoped would bring comfort. He gently pulled back the white sheet, revealing his grandfather's head. Let's hide together, David said. I don't know you, Alexei said, his burnt caramel eyes now looking vacantly at David's face, searching for recognition, finding none. David stroked Alexei's head gently. It's all right, he whispered, it's all right. You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you. I don't know you, Alexei murmured. I know you, David said, whispered, but hush, little boy, it's all right. I know your parents from the village. They sent me, so you see you're safe. We have to hide. Yes, David assured him, let's hide together. David leaned down and placed the pillow over his grandfather's face. He pressed hard with both hands. The thick black plastic felt surreal. Was he at home in bed dreaming? I know this is wrong, David murmured, crying. To hell with you, God, he blurted out as he pushed and sobbed. If there is a God. He pushed harder. How dare you, he asked. How could you? His tears made tiny serpentine tracks on the clear plastic encasing the pillow. How dare you, he repeated, sobbing. He pressed the pillow with increasing firmness to match the degree of resistance from the other side. He held firm while soon the counterpush decreased. He held while the resistance was less gone. Still he had held fast. Was it for 5, for 10, for 15, for 1,000 minutes? David stood up. He unzipped the plastic case, removed the pillow, placed it under Alexi's head. He leaned down, kissed his grandfather on the forehead. He stood blinking blankly at the wall ahead, unsure of what happened, unsure of who he was or what. Then he remembered Grace. She was in his car, waiting. He walked to the door, slid the chair from under the doorknob. He placed the chair where it belonged, walked to the television, turned the power switch on. Pillow Talk was still on air. David slipped into the hallway, closed the door behind him. Are you getting out of that bed? He heard Rock Hudson ask through the closed door, or am I coming in after you? You wouldn't dare, Doris Day exclaimed, but he had. Then David dove into the maze of hallways, following the arrows to the lobby. I must remain calm, he said, told himself, must go on, must think of Grace as if nothing has happened. He smiled weakly at Grace as he plopped into the driver's seat, started the engine, turned on the radio, drove to Logan Airport in Boston. He was on autopilot. He wasn't sure where he was, not on this flight to New York City, not in Ukraine in the village, not in the old country, not in the new. He felt as if he was floating through time, through space, like figures in a Chagall painting. He was neither here nor there. He had to push on for Grace. It was her turn now. Taxi in the city, Casablanca Hotel by Broadway, matinee next day. Orchestra seats just 5 rows from stage. Grace's eyes blue saucers when the orchestra struck the opening chords, her gaze riveted to the stage. David's mind was floating through time, through space, through Ukrainian pogroms, American playgrounds, weddings, divorces, first kiss, last kiss. The movie of his life was playing in vivid colors in his mind, but something was wrong. As Grace watched Fiddler on the Roof, he watched so many scenes of his life, but playing out of order. Sometimes the scenes running forward, sometimes backwards. A divorce, followed by his first kiss, followed by the birth of Grace, followed by his father's death. It was all out of sequence, out of time. But the fiddler was there. In the scenes he watched when his parents took him to dinner theater on to see Fiddler on the Roof. In the scenes of his first wedding when his father surreptitiously slipped an extra check to the violinist for her to play his favorite song from Fiddler. In scenes at his father's deathbed when David placed a ruby red RCA Red Seal record of Fiddler on the Roof on his father's turntable. The fiddler was there in all these scenes of his life and many more. He had been there in the background, always. Thank you. Kind of rushed that, but.
That's fantastic, Jeff. Thank you very much. Very, very well read. I'm very, very glad that you managed to get through to the end as well, because it's such a powerful and emotional ending. I'd encourage everyone, obviously, to read the bits that you had to skip over as well. So
thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay, excellent. So we're going to move on from our short story competition winner to our flash fiction and birthday girl competition winner. So Karen Henderson, author of Nature's Own. So Karen completed her MA in Creative and Critical Writing at the University of Gloucestershire. She's a former teacher of modern languages with a lifelong passion for reading and a newly found love for creating flash fiction and poetic prose. She adores spending time with good friends, drinking wine, listening to 80s music, cooking, dancing around her kitchen with her daughters, and open air swimming in equal measures. So following on from Jeff's fantastic first reading, thank you. I'm going to pass you over to Karen.
I hasten to say open air swimming, but not in December in England because it's bloody freezing. Anyway, so this piece, Nature's Own, was part of my dissertation that I wrote for my creative masters. And the dissertation was presented as an embedded narrative in which a counsellor and therapist, who's called Sandra, examines the benefits of journaling for well-being in an academic essay. And she uses evidence from a client's diary to discuss and illustrate her considerations. Now, this diary belongs to Hannah, who is a 46-year-old English teacher and she is experiencing mild depression, which she initially believes is due to perimenopause, but is in fact because of delayed grief. The diary contains some of Hannah's personal reflections, her responses to journaling exercises, copies of everyday to-do lists, transcripts of conversations and short stories, poetic prose, and flash fiction that Hannah writes as part of the journaling process. And Sandra has selected these documents to illustrate Hannah's journey in coming to terms with grief. And the journey is, Hannah's journal is written in a fictional almanac. So this piece is from September, and it's called Nature's Own, and Hannah's daughter has just left for university. The room is as we left it just a few hours earlier. It is tidy, the curtains pulled halfway across, and for once the bed is neatly made. I can see faint hand marks where she eased out the creases on the green throw. A pair of neatly folded jeans sit in the middle, next to Piglet, and I wonder if she meant to leave them. Has she packed enough? On the dresser, I see her hairbrush and a bag of hair ties. I pull out the grey desk chair and sit. I look around me, and after a minute or two or three, I notice the taut muscles in my back slacken just a little. I had thought the room might feel emptier. I had thought I might feel emptier. Weeks of waiting to hear results, waiting for confirmation, waiting to finally go. Weeks of holding my breath, hating the day that we would leave her, trying to hold on to those last moments, and she would catch me looking at her, roll her eyes and laugh, say, "For God's sake, I'm not going far." But it is far. Now, as I sit on her chair and slowly breathe out, I check myself, waiting for the rush of sadness, for the hot tears and hollow grief. I concentrate on my breath, and as I inhale, I smell her vanilla perfume. On the desk by the lamp is a collection of 5 shells arranged in a circle. They are from our beach, where the sanderlings hunt at the water's edge. I close my eyes and see them looking for juicy worms and sea snails, one eye on the incoming waves. They rake through the wet sand for just one more morsel until the waves turn and chase them back up the beach. I hear her shout, "Mummy, look at this one," and watch from a distance as she lifts a shell, nature's own fan, painted by the sea in hues of deep aubergine, which fade to baby pink. It is the best one, a pearly jewel for her treasure box. She places it gently into the yellow bucket and stoops to search again. The sunshine warms our backs and the whole world stretches around us. We are so very happy. Thank you.
That's perfect, Karen. Thank you very much. And it's such a beautiful piece, and I'm glad that we can get through the whole thing. So that's perfect. Thank you.
That's the beauty of flash fiction, folks, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So that was our flash fiction competition winner. So Karen with Nature's Own. So next, I would like us to have a piece from Scott Pomfret, one of our journal contributors. And Scott is the author of Disarray in this issue of the journal. I can't actually see Scott in the participant list. So please just shout out, Scott, if you're there. And if not, perhaps you've not been able to make it and I can read a selection from your piece. So Scott is the author of Since My Last Confession, a gay Catholic memoir, Hot Sauce, a novel, and the Q Guide to Wine and Cocktails, and dozens of other stories published in venues such as Ecotone, Post Road, and the New Orleans Review. Scott writes from the cramped confines of his tiny Provincetown beach shack, which he shares with his partner of 20 years. And he's currently working on a queer know-nothing novel set in antebellum New Orleans. So I'm also going to paste Scott's website link into the chat, so you can find out more information about Scott if you would like, but I don't believe he's been able to make it this evening. So I'm going to read a short selection from his journal piece, Disarray. After the authorities banned face coverings, the demand for Dr. Mailer's services skyrocketed. She never questioned her patients' motives. Her work was a matter of professionalism only. Consequences were for others of a more religious bent than she to judge. One of her first patients after the ban was the kind of person who could shout Mesopotamia in a crowded room and instantly win everyone's attention. He was undeniably handsome, an effect, Dr. Mailer presumed, of the shine of his personality and the perfect proportions of his features. Fuck me up, he said cheerfully. God enters us through our imperfections. It's how people connect, Dr. Mailer replied absent-mindedly. But she was just making conversation while the anesthesia took hold. A philosopher? Hey, wait a minute. Are you an MD or just a PhD? She assured him she'd been to medical school. Well, in that case, go ahead, Socrates. Fuck me up. Dr. Mailer promised she would. And she did. Her speciality was facial disarray, surgically distorting features sufficiently to thwart facial recognition technology. She was proud to say she rendered her patients strangers to law enforcement and frequently to themselves. Before she made a single incision, she studied Fuck Me Up. She kept no record of his real name closely. In her experience, the degree of change necessary to cause artificial intelligence to pass over to the next image without making an identification was a matter of art and judgment. What feature threatened to betray a patient? Was it a lazy eye, a prominent nose, or a Neanderthal brow? In most cases, it was nothing specific, but rather the relationship between the various features that required disruption. The mechanics of surgery weren't, of course, the end of the story. Many patients experienced the change as a form of social and emotional vertigo. The extent to which Dr. Mailer experienced any sympathy or concern, however, she set aside. She didn't treat the psyche. That was for PhDs in psychology to fix. Some patients, like Fuck Me Up, loved the new freedom. When he woke post-op, he gently traced the bandages over his new face with his fingertips. His own mother wouldn't recognize him, let alone the AI. But Dr. Mailer had no doubt that the shine of Fuck Me Up's personality would save him from lopsidedness. He would, she thought bluntly, still get laid. Okay, and I'm going to leave that there as a tantalizing opening to what is a very, very interesting story. So that was Scott Pomfret, and I've included Scott's website link in the chat if anybody would like a little bit more information about Scott's writing. Okay, perfect. And our next reader is one of our mini saga runners-up, Corella Kale. Now, I don't think Corella has been able to make it either. So unfortunately, I think you've got my voice once again, unless Corella snuck in without me noticing. But this piece is called Emotional Artifacts. And for those of you that didn't submit to the mini saga competition, the mini sagas are, including the title, exactly 50 words. So Corella is a writer and a digital artist who splits her time between the ethereal world of dreams and Toronto, Canada, depending on the weather. Recently, she has been published by the likes of Columbia Journal, Wrongdoing Magazine, and Solstice Literary Magazine. Forthcoming publications include Glassworks, Door is Ajar, and Grub Street, among others. So please feel free to find more information about Corella's work on her Instagram and Twitter feeds, which I'm just posting into the chat now. There we go. And I'm going to read her mini saga, which was the mini saga, one of the mini saga competition runner-ups, Emotional Artifacts. It's summertime in another dimension. I left my front door unlocked and all the furniture walked away. The cat is napping on the windowsill. Galaxies float past her and she swats them away like dust motes. At night, my eyes are open windows for strangers to climb into. Okay, perfect. So if you're watching the recording, Corella, thank you very much. I love that very, very short piece. And one of the wonderful things, I think this was mentioned in Karen's short bio, one of the wonderful things about the shorter pieces of fiction is that they can be so poetic as well. So thank you very much. Okay, excellent. So our next reader is another one of our journal contributors, Conrad Gardner, who I know is definitely here because I can see you there, Conrad. So author of Alan's Crisis, one of our journal contributors for this year. Conrad's fiction has previously been published by Martian Magazine, Black Hair Press, and Foul Writing. He has several forthcoming publications and likes quiet evenings. So for more information about Conrad's work, I'll copy and paste some links into the chat now, and I'll hand over to Conrad for your reading. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Ross. So yeah, I basically wrote Alan's Crisis when I was going through a crisis at university in my second year, and I finished it, and it was absolutely awful, and I couldn't get it published anywhere. And then like a year later, because I can't remember what month I submitted it now. I think I submitted it in summer, I want to say. I was then going through another crisis in summer, and I just reworked it and almost rewrote the whole thing. And that's the version that got published, so it was probably better. Well, definitely, my writing was awful in my first year. And so it's about an android that's been built and created by this scientist for some reason, and the android itself is going through an existential crisis because he doesn't know what the point of his creation is. Because I was going through this crisis of faith at the time. I have had a very tumultuous relationship with my religious beliefs, and I never really understood why I'm here on this planet. And so the story was kind of my way of trying to come up with some sort of explanation, I suppose. I should also probably explain that I named him Alan by taking different letters from the names of the three protagonists of one of my favorite films called Ex Machina, who are called Ava, Caleb, and Nathan. And since this is a film that deals with androids and creation, it kind of just felt natural to me. So I'm going to just read from section just towards the end where Alan is telling his creator that he doesn't like the clothes he's been given and he wants to have different colored clothes. He's interested in a mustard colored jumper that he saw on a TV show, which is Captain Kirk's jumper from Star Trek. And so I'll go from there. So it's starting with his creator talking, Isaac. Mustard, right. Were there any other colors you wanted to try? I recorded a mental list of colors he wanted. Sat opposite him, held out the tracksuit bottoms. Could you please wear these for the time being? He stood. Alan slipped the bottoms on. I'm glad you started watching the screen I installed. How are you finding it? Alan considered this. I find it entertaining, but some of the things they broadcast seem very crafted. I understand that people are acting, but I find them unconvincing. I nodded. His opinion formulation was surprising. I nudged my chair forwards, stared at his hairless face. I see. Can I assume that your existential crisis wasn't started by the television? Alan nodded. A curl of black hair fell forward, stopped above his eyes. So, what's eating you? In a literal or metaphorical sense, I cannot contain parasites. I know, metaphorical. Alan brushed his hair back, faced me. I feel like I have no purpose. Could you elaborate? He tightened his lips, ran his hands through his hair. I don't know why I'm here, what I'm supposed to do with myself. Wasn't I created for a specific function? I pushed my glasses up the bridge of my nose. Alan, I created you to decide your purpose. Was I a mistake? Was I designed to decide a long time ago and I'm now a piece of junk since I don't know? I shook my head, put my palm over his hand. I designed you to choose your function. I want you to decide what to do when you're ready. I rubbed my chattering legs, made another note to test his temperature response another time. Alan squeezed his eyes, looked back to me, said, I can choose what I want to do? I nodded. Forever? Yes. He sat still, confused. I'm struggling to decide what I want to do for my life cycle, he said. You don't have to decide right away. It took a lot for me to decide if I wanted to create you. I twisted my ring on the chain around my neck. I felt Alan's name engraved there. Come here, son. I held my boy in my arms. He was growing up so fast. Thank you.
Fantastic, Conrad. Thank you very much. And it's wonderful. I know it can be really difficult, obviously, but it's wonderful to hear that you have such a personal connection with that story as well. And I love that about fiction, that we can inject so much of ourselves into it, and yet it's something so unique and so different to us that it is almost like a new creation in of itself. So I applaud your efforts there, and rewriting it as well is such a hard thing, isn't it? So congratulations on rewriting it and getting it published. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So our next reader this evening is Nick Story, who I also don't believe has last minute been able to make it. So I've been able to make it, unless Nick, you've snuck into the chat without me seeing, but I don't think so. So Nick is one of our flash fiction competition runners-up, author of Night Song, so another short piece. And Nick is a writer living in the United States, and his fiction has appeared in The Normal School, the Indiana Review, and Monkey Bicycle. So for more information about Nick, I will put his website into the chat for you now. So I'll copy and paste that over. Perfect. So there we go. And I'm going to read from his flash fiction competition runner-up piece, Night Song. We live on the shore near the smashed bridge, where the water is clean enough for fishing and bathing. When it turns red, you should not drink. The redness comes downstream once a week. Our lifeguard sits in an umpire's chair to watch for it. The rain has a milky colour with odours of sulphur and sewer. It makes the flowers grow enormous through rubble and metal, in fiery reds and neon oranges, but it also leaves painful lesions on skin. We stay in our shacks until it passes, playing with dice and telling stories. If you are curious on a rainy day, the old men and women will tell you the name of each weapon that created the world. Bombs made the bridge and the road. Napalm scorched the forest. The great powers turned the rain and rivers into weapons. They'll tell you that the great powers were never more creative than when they were making weapons. Something chemical destroyed the minds of our neighbors. The green band is psychotic. They cannot speak our language. They moan and shriek. They steal our food and clothes and the little art pieces we make. Sometimes they carry one of us off. They practice cannibalism. Yesterday, we stood with clubs and spears on the uneven stones as they rushed our camp. We beat them back decisively. I stabbed one in the guts, felt the point of the stick overcome the resistance of skin, and watched him walk away holding blood. But there was no time for celebration. It was almost 8:30. We ran to our houses to get in beds. We did not want to get caught outside when the song began. Every night, the song comes out of the sky, tinkling piano scales and a warm synthesizer, a voice in an unknown language, high and clear, like bells from another world. When we hear the song, we immediately relax. Warmth fills our heads and our bodies. Drowsiness comes, and within minutes, we are asleep. We know it is another leftover weapon. We know it can be fatal to fall asleep outside, not only because of exposure to the elements, but because without the protection of a roof and walls, the music can drive one mad. Still, many worship the song as a goddess. I don't go that far, but I understand why they worship. What is kinder than sleep? Especially the sleep of the nightly song, which is deep and replenishing and nearly always brings pleasant dreams. Thank you very much, Nick. So if you've managed to watch this back in the recording, a very, very, again, powerful piece and very, very specific to futures. So fantastic to have such a range of interpretations of futures in the journal. Okay, excellent. So let's move on to another journal contributor piece, which is The Lost Fisherman by Leslie Evans. Now, I'm just looking through the participants list Leslie did contact me to say she might not be able to attend in time for her reading. So unless she's snuck in and I haven't seen her, and I don't think she has, I'll read her piece, or an excerpt from her piece at least, which is called The Lost Fisherman. So Leslie is currently studying for an MA in creative and critical writing at the University of Gloucestershire. After half a lifetime as a lawyer, she is retraining as the writer she promised her childhood self she would one day become. She writes mainly flash fiction and short stories, often with coastal themes and settings. And I should also mention that it's a pleasure to have Leslie back. So last year, she was our mini saga competition winner and a journal contributor. So many congratulations to Leslie for her third publication with Superlative. The Lost Fisherman. Andrew ducked through the cottage doorway and stepped onto the harbour side, where the wintry light picked out the tree bark shades of his hair and beard. The tide was fully in, a soft rippling beat against the sea wall. He took a breath of the briny air and for a moment felt as calm as the bay. But as his gaze shifted out to sea, he noticed that beyond the harbour mouth, everything was a blurry wash of indeterminate marine hues, like an amateur watercolour. He knew what this meant. He gave a short, shrill whistle. As Clara's muscle bulk passed unhurriedly through the cottage door, Andrew bowed his head a fraction. The Newfoundland acknowledged him with the slightest twitch of one dark ear tip. There's some kind of thwart field around the port, Andrew said. Clara raised her huge muzzle to sniff the air, detecting immediately the clumsy storm masking. She gave a furious bark and then leapt. As she cleared the girth of the sea wall, she was a shimmering streak of black and gold. By the time she hit the water, she was a large grey seal. Andrew watched her torpedo-like progress, felt the soft pop of atmospheric adjustments as she pierced the thwart field, then stepped back indoors as the full tumult of the storm was unleashed around the bay. Moments later, the siren at the lifeboat station began to sound in long, rising blasts. Station head Fergus McAllister was already opening the heavy slipway doors when Andrew arrived. "Hi, Andrew. I can see Clara beat you to it again," he said. Clara was standing on the slipway in the pelting rain, watching the maul of black-green waves below. McAllister was a slight, energetic man who spoke over his shoulder, iPad in hand, as he worked around the Pride of Fife, completing the pre-launch checklist. "Can you believe this storm?" he asked. "Just came out of nowhere." Andrew grunted and followed him to the gantry steps. "What are we dealing with today, Fergie?" "An oil tanker off the Fenway banks. Captain claims they've been putting out the Mayday call for almost an hour, but we didn't pick up the signal. None of the East Coast stations did. I can't make sense of it." Andrew knew to change the subjects. "Who's our crew today?" "Ailsa Redgate is coxswain. Jake." Andrew, who was only half listening, tuned in again as McAllister finished. "And, of course, your good self, a stern man and dog handler." "Not that Clara needs a handler," said Ailsa, appearing at the top of the gantry, already in her oilskins. "I swear that dog preempts all your commands anyway, eh, Andrew?" Her smile faded quickly as Andrew turned away. "Aye, Clara's a smart one, all right," McAllister said. "Lucky too. Not one life lost at sea in the 3 years since she joined the crew. Let's hope her luck holds out today." And I'm going to leave that there on a tantalizing cliffhanger. So that's a fantastic story by Leslie. And as I said, her third contribution to the journal. So thank you very much, Leslie. And I will let you all have the pleasure of reading that for yourselves, either in your journal that you've already got or hopefully your journal that arrives very, very soon. Okay, excellent. So moving on from Leslie's piece, The Lost Fisherman, next up to read is Velid, author of 11:15 for Lisbon and another of our journal contributors. So Velid is a Yugoslav-born writer and visual artist based in the Czech Republic. His first poetry collection in Bosnian won the 2012 Mac Dizdar Award, while his second poetry manuscript won the 2021 Dharma Books Best Manuscript Contest in Belgrade and is pending publication. Velid's work in English and his visual arts have been featured in Ecothea Review, Folio, Rattle, and elsewhere. He has further work forthcoming in Bomb and Grist Journal. He serves as guest editor of Palette and Frontier poetry magazines. So for more information about Velid's work, I'll copy and paste some links into the chat during his reading, but I'll pass over to you, Velid. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll be reading a little piece from my work in progress, which is a manuscript called Portugal. And what I'm doing is I'm writing little fiction pieces about photographs, which I like. So this one I'm going to try to show you. It shows 3 women, basically. It's a black and white photo by one of famous Portuguese photographers from the 50s. I'm not allowed to show the photo with the story itself because I didn't buy the rights yet, but I will once I decide to publish the book itself. So here goes 11:15 for Lisbon. 3 weeks ago, when they phoned to say yes, grandmother sat down and began to cry. The future of my absence shook her in advance. Her quiet hands gathered in her lap, then touched her knees, then fixed her headscarf. The week before that, when I took the train north and went to Lisbon with my typewriter tucked underneath my seat, nothing whatever seemed solid. I felt the train was an iceberg, drifting with the current in such a steady way that it seemed motionless. After that call, the first thing I did was go to the market square and get someone with a camera to come to take a picture. Grandmother's window and her elongated face peering through it. That's what I wanted to remember. Not the garden, not the narrow road that it gives you a view of, but the 2 of us framed by the window that has framed her life from birth to old age. A picture frame I was now to break out of. In search of what? A different angle, another perspective. Only Tia Mafalda came over for a coffee and so sat down with us and stuck her head out of the corner of the window at Grandma's urging, her busybody face never changing that expression of a bean weevil that has just broken out into the sunlight. I had to think of something else, and so turned to face the photographer and managed a smile just as the camera shutter closed on us. Snap. The train then, the one then and the one again. Getting on board, I meet a woman's eyes. We lock for a moment, a little mountain view in them, all smiles. Then I sit down, facing the opposite way, releasing her to her male companion. The memory of that moment ago pulls itself over the back of my eyelids as I close them, breathing in. Did she look at me like that? Was that really? Will I find it all in Lisbon, Maria Lisboa? Now the train starts, and we sit swaying like flames on many candle wicks in the same wind, all in unison. Oh, to be carried, to be traveled, to abandon a life and slip into a new one, to slip out of it too when the day has passed, and put it away on a dresser, then sleep freely, a sleep of anyone. Not to be even Margarida, the typist at Alves, Ramos and Lopez, Advogados, 124/14 Rua d'Angola. To enter a dream, spotting the eyes with smiles and a mountain view in them, place my hand over her hand, resting on that little table. Desire runs. I open my eyes again and think of the mountains outside, unmoved by the life abandoned. Sun inches closer and closer to the rim. Grandmother too must be getting on with her diurnal journey from the kitchen to the sofa to the window on repeat. She will take months to learn to cook smaller meals, or may never learn. She will keep on leaving the torn clothes around, thinking I would mend them. Nights, she will wake and tell her dreams to an empty house, hearing nothing in return. Tia Mafalda will become a dear guest. Together they will sit by the window, looking every once in a while at a framed photograph on the wall. In it, I will forever smile, and Grandma will forever hide her sadness in the softness of her expression. Tia Mafalda will forever squint her eyes and purse her lips like a bean weevil in the sun. 70 years from now, our photograph may end up at some flea market and some hand might pick it out from a box full of similar ones and buy it for a pittance, imagining who knows what. Oh, to be carried, to be traveled, to be framed and imagined, to be put away. The train halts. Climbing down, stepping onto the platform, waiting for the commotion to peter out, for the current of stomping feet to subside, I'm suddenly motionless. My eyes attempt to take in the bustle, wander left and right. Out of the blue, a man is looking at me. His eyes hold mine with a delicate attentiveness, then let go. Another life. I live it for a moment in this standstill. Then the time resumes. I notice the man going some meters ahead, holding the woman with the smiles and little Mountain Dew by the hand. If they could be my life. We've arrived in Lisbon, final stop. Everyone, please get off here. Several railmen keep bleating. I follow the couple with my eyes until they step out into the evening dark. Desire runs. Thank you.
That's superb, Veli. Thank you very much. And that was absolutely beautifully read. So thank you very much for that. A superb story. And I'm really glad, as with everybody, that we can include you in the journal this year. Thank you. Okay. Oh, hello, Nick. That's okay, Nick. We've just, not that long ago, just about 10 minutes ago, got through your story. So maybe if we have time at the end, you can have a read through, maybe do a little reading, but I did read your story on your behalf. So hopefully you can watch that back if we don't have time at the end on the recording. Thank you for joining us. No, not at all. Okay, so Velid, thank you. Next up, just before we reach the midway point, we have another journal contributor with a story called Aubrey. So this is Kim Brockett-Stammen's story. So Kim, thank you for joining us. Kim's writings have appeared or are forthcoming in Litro, December Magazine, Carve, and many others. Her work has been nominated for Pushcart and Best Short Fiction Anthologies, and she holds an MFA from Spalding University. For more information about Kim's work, I'll copy and paste some links into the chat during her reading. But without further ado, Kim, I'll pass over to you in, was it sunny Seattle, I think?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank
good.
you very much. So I'm just going to read the first part of this story called Aubrey. Aubrey, when he was born, had the most beautiful toes. Wriggling delicately above his eyes, already beginning to sign, the 10 pale stubs swayed in a tangle of damply curled golden brow. At that first sight, I knew with a rush of impaling, prescient numbness that mine would be a special boy. Although his digitless feet might not clump far, his influence and consequence would. Aubrey grew up to be a magician of sorts. Standing motionless on his stumps, he mesmerized with a glance. Waving and leaping above the calm blue of his ocean eyes as he spoke, twirling, curling, almost seeming to spiral, his agile, brief digits communicated with people's passions, interpreted their expressions, and defined their innermost emotions. Since the advent of genetic migration of toes to foreheads, caused by shoes, extensive neglect of the art of walking, to say nothing of climbing or jumping, and finally by the replacement of much of human interaction by close-ups of faces on screens, Aubrey was the best by far at the luminous language of toes. First, the neighbors, and then people from towns near and far began visiting our small home for a glimpse of him, a conversation, a grasp of understanding. Anyone who could still walk began the pilgrimage. I spent my days shepherding, serving tea and biscuits to weary travelers, sweeping up after them. Word spread, and soon people from all over the country clamored for Aubrey's face, his eyes, the wisdom of his toe brows. I moved my few things to a closet so that we could convert my bedroom to a broadcasting studio. With my meager savings, we purchased the equipment he needed, a camera aimed at his face, an assortment of gizmos and cables. And there he stood all day long, the camera trained on his toes, which waved continually like seaweed in current. No matter who encountered him, via his video feed or in person, he understood. Rage, hope, despair, confusion, aspiration, and his toes swirls of understanding assuaged. He provided his services freely, indicating to me with a rare motion of irritation in the kink and swipe of his left second toe knuckle that the needs of our own household were of no consequence. His communications became increasingly famous. Soon his toes, in all manner of languages, gracefully responded to people all over the world. Aubrey became a televised show, then a channel, then a station, and finally my special boy, by then a full-grown man, founded the Aubrey Broadcasting Company and developed a retinal nano implant with the capability of continually promulgating a live image of his face. With a subscription and a medical procedure nearly as minor as the blink of an eye, anyone could, at any time, have Aubrey's toes and brows in their peripheral vision. Aubrey did also concurrently speak in the old-fashioned way, with words. But being in conversation with him, I was told, shifted the function of spoken language to something more like music, still useful in gathering emotional import, but nearly obsolete in transferring specific meaning. For meaning, you needed to look above Aubrey's eyes to the words he was signing with the waving, homely softness of his toes. People all over the world clamored for implants. In the interests of global peace and trade, nearly all national governments funded Aubrey retinal installation for their citizens. As I had foreseen from the instant he emerged from my womb, my boy's influence and eminence would travel far. He became the nucleus of all human communication. There was only one thing he never said. We'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Kim. You're going to leave us right there. Excellent.
Yeah.
Another superb story. And as I mentioned earlier on, it's wonderful to have such a range of stories in the journal. So thank you very much. And I really, really like that one as well. And a very good reading. Again, excellent readings this evening. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to take just a 5-minute break from the readings and hear some midway remarks from Gemma, who is one of our Superlative editors, about what Gemma looks for when she's judging the submissions that we receive. And I like to include something like this in the launches, because one of the best things about having multiple editors working on the journal is that a much wider variety, as we've seen, a much wider variety of pieces are selected. And that's something that I'm very proud of about Superlative. So let me hand you over to Gemma just for a few minutes to tell you a little bit about her process when she's reading and when she's judging, and the sorts of things Gemma looks for, which I know are always different to the sorts of things I look for when I'm reading. So whenever you're ready, Gemma, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone that's read so far. It's but yeah, been so lovely to hear it. And I think especially when reading it, when we obviously read the pieces, when we make selections, and then seeing the authors read them and hearing them read sort of I think someone had mentioned in their sort of American English, like, you know, in the like native language, like native tongue, let's say, of the writer. It's really nice to hear. So thank you very much. This year I think was really exciting because we had, as Ross said earlier, lots of different contributors and like lots of contributors. So the judging, we're in our like 3rd year of judging, so I thought this year would, you know, I thought we would have had it down, that we knew what we were doing and the 3 of us would be able to, it'd be easy, you know. But this year was the hardest year because we just all had different opinions and there was more compromises that had to be made than ever before, or more people, it was like voting against each other. So it was really great and it made it a lot more interesting. And that was really thanks to all the diverse contributions we had, and just all the like, yeah, great stories, the just differences and everything that people were able to kind of bring to their pieces. So when we are looking and when we're reading pieces, I guess I really like things that I guess like I guess emotionally, like I like being emotionally moved, which I'm sure most readers do. But in things that just are I really like people driven. So because of the theme, I think there was loads of interesting ways to talk about worlds and do some world building and look at different, possible futures. But having the people centric in that, I think, was still really powerful, and it really came through. So even though futures might lead sometimes to look at like a dystopian maybe kind of future, or looking at that, I think especially a lot of the stories, or most stories we've got included, really still have a strong human presence, and that for me is what makes such a great story. So yeah, it was just really wonderful, and I love listening to everyone read them. So thank you so much for everyone for submitting, taking part, and then taking part tonight. And obviously thanks again for Ross for always organizing, for letting me contribute and letting me help in my own way, but just allowing me to read so many different pieces is just really lovely. And I think it helps me grow as a reader and a writer, and I'm just so glad that we get to share it as well in this format. So thank you very much. But yeah, I just thought I'd add that, if that's okay.
That's perfect, Gemma. Thank you very much. It's always lovely to hear from yourself or from one of the other editors every year as well. And you're absolutely right. It is an enormous amount of fun judging the pieces. It was incredibly difficult this year. Yes, of course, because we had lots of submissions, but there was lots of disagreement. So it took a long time to come to our final decision. So once again, congratulations to everyone, because it definitely didn't happen immediately. We didn't immediately settle on, oh yeah, perfect, that's definitely the one. It took an awful lot of discussion, and the pieces you were up against were superb. So you've definitely come out on top. Okay, perfect. So let's move into the second half of this afternoon's readings. So next we have a flash fiction competition runner-up. So this is a story called Present Tense, written by Richard Hooton. So thank you very much, Richard. So born and brought up in Mansfield, Richard studied English literature before becoming a journalist and a communications officer. He has had numerous short stories published and has been listed in various competitions, including winning contests run by Segura, Henshaw Press, Cranked Anvil, and many others. Richard lives in Mossley, near Manchester, and is a member of Mossley Writers. I should also mention that Richard was a Superlative short story competition runner-up in 2020 as well. So it's a pleasure to have you back, Richard. Thank you. And to see how much your writing has improved over that time. So many congratulations. This is a very emotional piece, so I will let you take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Ross, and thanks to everyone at Superlative for the opportunity, and thanks very much for choosing my story for your journal. This is Present Tense. I gaze at a transformed garden, beautifully smart, fresh green, vivid colours dancing. A transistor radio, alone on the kitchen counter, fills the silence. Andy Williams' golden voice croons Moon River. You enter the room, Albert. Take my hand as if it's a gift. May I have the pleasure, Margaret? Merriment sparkles in your deep timbre. You pull me into an embrace, woody citrus fragrance of florist number 89. We waltz. This could be our first dance, hesitant, a stranger's body close, uncertain where to place feet and fingers. It's a struggle to move creaking joints and aching muscles. Your hands support me, somehow firm and gentle, steadfast. The beat cajoles. We find our rhythm, movements mirroring, we're one with the tune. Cold linoleum becomes Blackpool Tower Ballroom's warm, sprung floorboards. The decades fall away. 1, 2, 3. Rise and fall. My summer dress sways, our steps light and frisk. You whisper 3 wonderful words in my ear that I haven't heard for so long. The radio crackles occasionally. No trouble, the melody's within. A noise from outside tries to disturb us. This could be our last dance, holding on for dear life, fearing the song's end, wanting to stay in this moment forever. Another voice intrudes, breaking through like a stone smashing glass. Mum, what are you doing shuffling around the kitchen? Suspicion blends with bemusement in Shirley's tone. You in La La Land again? Our daughter fusses with a packet and pan, clicks on the kettle. I'll get you breakfast. The music plays on without us. I cling to our dining chair just as I cling to the fragments of our past that fall from me like snow. Huddling into my nightie, I can make out through a clouded window the garden's tangled mass of frosted weeds and brambles. On the table, an incomplete crossword bears the spidery scrawl of my once neat handwriting, the words trailing off. The kettle reaches its crescendo with a shuddering hiss. Porridge huffs and puffs on the boil. Shirley looks at me, then touches my hand as if it's fractured. We can take Rosie to the park later. You could wear your new dress. She turns the radio off, hands me a mug of tea. And I'll do your hair. You'd like that, wouldn't you? You'd adore our granddaughter, Albert. She's grown so much. The years go fast, the days so slow. Condensation begins to evaporate. I know the frost and mist will return, but for now, the view is clear. Chiff-chaff lands on the dormant grass and begins its song of spring. The mug warms my hands into movement. 1, 2, 3, fall and rise. I think about completing that crossword, dressing up, and have our delightful granddaughter playing in the park, a memory to be added. I sit down at the table and sip my tea. I'd love that. Until we dance again, Albert.
Fantastic, Richard. Thank you very much. It's a superb and devastating story. Some of the things that I absolutely love the most about story writing. And a couple of people have put a few little quotes in the chat. And absolutely, this is a story full of wonderful phrasings and turns of phrase. So thank you very much for that. Okay, excellent. So now moving on back to another journal contributor. So our next piece is going to be read by Emma Maguire, author of Limoncello. So Emma is an Australian writer and researcher who researches women's life writing by day and by night, writes weird stories about intimacy, femme relationships and creepy landscapes. Her fiction, essays and criticism have been published in Kill Your Darlings, The Conversation, Lip and many more. So you can find her at emma.maguire@wordpress.com, which I'll copy and paste into the chat while Emma's reading. So thank you very much, Emma, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Ross, and thank you everyone for reading. This has been such a treat to just sit here and hear stories all morning. Absolutely fabulous. I'm going to read a little excerpt from my story, Limoncello, which came out as a weird kind of fable, which was a new way of working for me. So I hope you enjoy it. Frida is lying in the bath, thinking about drinking limoncello in the summertime, about the cold glass in her hand and the tart liquid pooling on her tongue before she swallows it. The memory, which isn't a single memory, but a composite of sensations and scenes, makes her ache. She knows that this summer there will be no limoncello or long nights or loud music. There will be no lovers, no lions, no late morning pancakes crisp round the edges, no late morning cups of tea swallowed while a tongue goes deliciously to work between her legs. No gentle weight of her body floating in the ocean until freckles bloom wildly on her limbs and her face, and she rolls in with the tide to her towel and her novel and her bottle of limoncello to lie beneath the banana palms, strands of seaweed trailing behind her. Because this summer, Frida is going to have a baby, and babies do not have time for liqueur or oral sex or novels or the sea. Frida realizes she is crying, and she watches the tears fall onto her breasts and the strange belly protruding out of the bathwater like a fleshy island. Coils of her thick, dark hair sway in the water around her new body. She cannot stop crying. It happens gradually. Her tears become a brook and then a stream and then a river, coursing over her odd, swollen form and filling the tub to its lip. Through the open window, Frida sees beyond the smelly city, beyond the red cliffs, to the dark strip of ocean on the horizon. That is her ocean, and she longs for the freedom of it now, but it feels beyond her in some immovable way. Through the night she keens, bawling hotly into the tub, pickling her body with her tears. She prays to every goddess she can think of and begs them to take her child away. The day becomes another, and then a week becomes a month. Still, she cries. Finally, Her body has grown wrinkled and soft in the tub. She feels she is on the brink of formlessness, and her whole apartment is flooded. The neighbors below have set up buckets. And then she feels the pain. The creature in her belly is moving. She knows right away that this is it. The baby is ripping, tearing his way out of her. Frida worries about doing this without a doctor, but then she remembers that plenty of women choose water births and that their bodies have been ready for this since before hospitals or forceps or medical degrees. Even so, it is as bad as she feared. There is blood, there is fire, there are all the things they never tell you about until it is too late. And then there is him, the baby, but not quite like she expected. She sits up straighter in the tub and gathers the strange child to her, but he is slippery and slithers from her grasp. He swims around her feet, playing, nibbles cheekily on a toe, and then hides behind her knee. His body is fish-like. He has small, sharp teeth, and on his head, a crown of fuzzy hair parts around a single budding horn. He is a delight, she realizes, and already so capable in the water. What are you? She reaches for him tentatively. The child lingers between her ankles, looking up at her from beneath the water's surface with green glassy eyes. He darts suddenly towards her hand and she feels a smarting. Blood wells on her fingertip. You bit me. They regard one another. The child's lips peel back in a shy, repentant grin that reveals his pointed teeth, perfectly white. He wiggles against her ankle. Frida sniffs and wipes the last of the liquid from her eyes. And I will leave it there. Thank you so much for having me.
That's fantastic, Emma. Thank you very much, and beautifully read. Another wonderful story that just doesn't go the way you expect it to go. So that's superb, and I hope, and I'm sure everybody will enjoy and love reading the end of it. So thank you. Okay, excellent. So next up, also from Australia, we have Sean Crawley. So another journal contributor in this year's issue, an author of Eternal Life. So in his shed on the east coast of Australia, Sean writes short stories, songs, non-fiction, and the odd angry letter. Dead People Don't Make Jam and Long Jetty Short Stories, volumes 1 and 2, are short story collections published by Ginninderra Press. Sean's work has also appeared in literary journals, anthologies, and has won various writing competitions. When not writing, Sean can be found fishing, swimming, cooking, teaching, renovating an old house, and yelling at cars at speed down his suburban street. And I should also say that once again, Sean is a previous Superlative contributor from last year's issue, and Sean and I have spoken a few times over the past year, and we love for previous contributors to keep in touch. So thank you very much, Sean, and it's a pleasure to have you back again.
Thank you, Ross. It's a great privilege to be published a second time in your fantastic journal, which made it to Australia in time. So I'm just going to read the start of my story, Eternal Life, and go for about 5 minutes or whatever that is. Some people think Neil Banks doesn't deserve disability funding. They argue that decades of self-inflicted drug abuse warrant his disqualification from any entitlements. The tax revenue collected from hard-working ordinary men and women shouldn't be wasted on someone who is drug-fucked and of no use to society. He should be left to suffer the consequences of his own actions. I beg to differ. And who am I to judge, you ask? Well, that is a good question. My credentials are certainly questionable. And the same people who want Neil to disappear would be pissed off if they knew how I earned good money, yes, taxpayer dollars, to simply sit with Neil and play Scrabble, drink coffee, eat donuts, and talk shit. It's the best job I've ever had, which is not a hard call, since every other job I've had has been tedious, torturous, tiresome, and lowly paid. Neil takes his turn. In the style of a school teacher conducting a spelling quiz, as he lays down the tiles to form forever, he announces, forever. One day we will live forever, and our offspring will need to be shipped off to other planets. Forever. With the F and B both landing on triple letter squares, he scores 29 points. My turn. Now, if I had a T instead of the Q on my rap, I could make it tiresome by backing it onto Neil's last word. Or if I had a K, I could make it irksome. Don't you hate getting the Q when all the U's are already out on the board and totally inaccessible? Stumped, I questioned Neil's sentence. One day we will live forever and our offspring will need to be shipped off to other planets? Yes, I'm absolutely certain. I had a vision. Here we go. The game pauses. Perhaps never to be finished. It doesn't matter. We have plenty of time. Neither of us are in a rush anymore. I work part-time, transitioning to retirement. Everything is slowing down. And Neil no longer consumes drugs such as speed, ice, or amyl nitrate to get a rush. Though after dinner each night, he smokes one cigarette and drinks 2 fingers of Japanese whiskey. There's a bit of a rush from that. He had a vision. Most of the time, Neil is rational and a staunch atheist. Occasionally, though, he shocks me with some pretty out there outbursts. Once, when I noticed him wearing this rose quartz bracelet, which I had never seen before, he told me, I didn't choose it, it chose me. And as I was paying for it, the girl in the shop said rose quartz helps to inspire an attitude of compassion and kindness. You know I need help in that area. I thought he was joking, but as he rambled on that day, I discovered he was seriously getting into some new age funky. Then, 2 days later, the bracelet was gone, and when I asked him about it, he went on and on about the stupid things people believe in. It's quite possible these odd meanderings of his mind are flashbacks triggered by the years of drug abuse, LSD, THC, MDM, psilocybin, ayahuasca, opium, the list goes on. He does it all. Being a paid employee, I sit back and listen without judgment. Well, I do judge, just not out loud. Besides, his visions are entertaining, and when I occasionally can't help but laugh at some of his preposterous scenarios, he laughs as well and says, crazy, eh? And gives me a big wink. I had the vision while floating in the hydrotherapy pool down at Ingara, he says. Susie, the physio, was supporting me at the time. You've met her, haven't you? Yes, I have, I reply. I've never told that Neil and Susie and I hooked up not long after we met one afternoon at his place. We agreed it might be best not to tell him about us. Sometimes I think we should have, as on occasion he tells me how he'd like to fuck Susie, which I do find a bit irksome. As well, Neil has told Susie he suspects I might be gay. Mixing business and pleasure can be tricky. And I'll leave that there. So thank you very much.
Superb, Sean. Thank you very much. Another fantastic entry, and it's brilliant to have you back in the journal again. So thank you. And thank you for joining us, obviously, very, very early, like lots of other people who are joining too.
Yeah. Thank you, Ross.
No, thank you. Okay, excellent. So moving away from Australia now, we have a piece called Oh Canada, which is another one of our journal contributions. And this is by Robert Kibble, who I can see is definitely on the participant list. So hello, Robert, thank you. So Robert lives west of London with a wife, a teenage son, and a cornucopia of half-finished writing projects. A few have been published over the years, which, it has to be admitted, is very pleasing. If only a less creative day job wouldn't keep getting in the way, he's sure it would be more. So I'll paste Robert's Twitter handle into the chat as he's reading and hand over to you, Robert. So thank you very much.
Okay, so this is Oh Canada. Manitoba, November 1955. The class goes silent. Just one word out of place, but it's all it takes. She looks round to see if anyone noticed, but of course they have, and most importantly, Johnson has. I don't call him our teacher because he doesn't teach us anything apart from who we aren't and how to sing a song we hate. He grabs the wooden board from his desk and walks slowly towards her, his toothy grin showing satisfaction that someone has fallen foul of his rules. Her eyes widen, her beautiful brown eyes. She trembles as Johnson puts the rope round the back of her head, holding her long black hair tight to her neck. He drops the board so it whacks her in her chest. She tries to hold in the cry of pain. I look up at the clock. There's an hour to go. Plenty of time for someone else to attract Johnson's wrath. Plenty of time for a word out of place, a forgotten rule to be broken, a word uttered in our own tongue, for us to be punished for being who we are. I sit silent, consumed with hatred for this man, appointed to try to destroy us. I have talked back before, and I've had the board. I've been left with it at the end of "Oh Canada," faded away, and I've paid the price. Opening my right hand, I can see the scars of the times I've paid that price. She has soft hands. We held hands once, when no one was looking. She ran a gentle finger down the line of one of my scars. Of all of us, she's the gentlest, the smallest, the one who most wants to do what she's told. Her mother died in a car crash, or so she's been told. I'm not so sure. I've heard tales of the police stealing our people when an accident happens, spiriting them away to be forgotten in so-called care homes or foster families. I told her to hope that her mother might be alive, that the police lied, that every one of the whites lied, and that someday we will have justice in this land, in our land. The snow outside is getting deep. I'll have a long walk home if I miss the bus, but as the clock ticks, I see her face again, and I see her fear. Her time is running out, only half an hour left. Her eyes flick round, not willing someone else to make a mistake, because that would be cruel, and she's not cruel, but deep down she's hoping, so the board will pass to someone else, that dreaded board, the board which says Indian on it, but means so much more. Whoever has that board when the day ends, when the clock ticks away. A tear falls from her cheek onto her pad. It spreads out. I see it. I want to wipe her face, to tell her that it will be all right, to tell her that someday we will stand up and shout that these men came and punished us for speaking our own language, for being the rightful owners of this land, for respecting the spirits of this land, and no matter what they do to us, we will get our revenge just by being alive. We will continue to live here. We continue to exist, and we will not bow to them. We will not be wiped out by them. Only 5 minutes to go. I look at my hand again. I look at the snow. I look at her. She's shaking. She's never faced the cane. She's never had to walk back to her foster family through the freezing wind. Soon we will stand for the song. Soon it will be too late. I know what I have to do. She must not suffer like I've suffered. She does not deserve that. I push my book off the desk so it falls on my foot, hoping it looks enough like an accident. I swear in my own tongue. I look up at Johnson, trying to look shocked, resisting a rebellious smile. He walks over to her, looking almost disappointed, staring at her a little too long. She stares up into his eyes. I remember her staring into mine. I will hold that thought. I will become that thought. I will wrap myself in that thought. He grabs the board from her, his hands brushing against her chest as he does so, adding another line to my mental list of his crimes. He pulls the board up and walks over to me. He places the rope around my neck. The scar on my hand begins to throb, as if it knows what's coming. I am doing a good thing. My ancestors will be proud of me.
Fantastic, Robert. Thank you very much. A brilliant and very, very powerful story. And obviously you and I have already talked about this, and it is superb, and it sounds even better when it's read out loud. So thank you very much for joining us and reading this evening. Okay, excellent. So moving on from that wonderful journal contribution to another of our mini sagas. So another mini saga competition runner-up So this is by Rebecca Klassen, author of Catching Fireflies. So Rebecca is an editor from Gloucestershire. She has had her work published in The Fair, Literary, Dyslexia, and Stroud Short Stories. She's won the London Independent Short Story Prize for flash fiction and read her work at Stroud Book Festival and Cheltenham Literature Festival. So Becca's another of our previous contributors and was Superlative's 2021 flash fiction competition winner. So many congratulations for joining us again, Beck. I'll copy and paste a couple of links into the chat while Beck is reading in case you'd like to learn more about her many publishing successes that she's had over the past couple of years. So I will hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Ross, and thanks everyone for coming to listen. It's been great hearing the story so far. This story I've reworked many times, and one of my favorite things to do is cut a story down. I know a lot of people like to write longer things, but I like to sort of get it all on the page and then cut it away and keep cutting until you get to the bare bones. So it's only 5 lines, so buckle in. I'd caught fireflies with Dad before he left. Flyers are male, he'd said. The girls sit and glow. I swoop the jar and it fills with a lightning light rhythm. I give Mum the jar when a man knocks. She hides the screwed up tissues, determined to shine for him. The end.
Fantastic, Beck. Thank you very much. Very, very well read again. And you're absolutely right. I love cutting and cutting and cutting away. And sometimes you can say so much more in so much less, can't you? And if you're just left with the absolute core of the story, then what's left must be wonderful. And that's brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so going now from a mini saga to a slightly longer story. This is another of our journal contributions for this year. And this is a story called I Would Ask You for Coffee, But There's No Milk by Amy Cameron. So thank you very much, Amy. Amy is a teacher living in the Highlands of Scotland with her husband and 2 children. She writes prose, which is observational and mildly funny, in her opinion, and has completed the first draft of a novel. She tweets at Amy O'Cameron, which I'll paste into the chat for you in a second. And I'll hand over to you, Amy. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ross. You have to excuse my voice. I teach small children, so I get a lot of lurgy. And I also didn't realise till I turned my camera on that I'm wearing a Christmas jumper. There wasn't time to change. So this is, I would ask you for coffee, but there's no milk. This is the opening section. Louis had always said he would fill the bath with water. Not just the bath, but the sinks too in all 3 bathrooms. And the Belfast one in the kitchen was voluminous, of course. Possibly if you blocked the plug hole of the ensuite shower, it would hold a decent amount in the tray before it risked spilling over. Those were convenient and quick ways to store large quantities of water, but there are other ways too. Rose had collected some 15 or 20 vases during her time in this house in marriage. Many of them that cheap coloured glass type that came free with florist flowers, but water wasn't fussy. It was unlikely to say it preferred the blue antique one left by Louis by the grandmother he'd rarely met, or the crystal they'd had shipped during their honeymoon, for risk of it shattering on the journey home and lacing their fair trade cotton clothing with dangerous shards. And that was just in the house. Rose was sure there were likely to be any number of suitable receptacles in the garages or the large garden shed that she'd never seen inside. The gardener definitely had a wheelbarrow, and she'd seen him use these strange, flexible buckets as he went about his work, and she pretended not to notice. In the end, water wasn't an issue, well, not a shortage of it anyway, and Rose was sure that would have upset Louis, who didn't like to be shown up, even by an apocalypse. When the time for reflection came, Rose concluded it would be grossly unfair to say she had had a bad life. The morning telly was full of women who'd been beaten, trafficked, conned out of their life savings, left for dead at the side of the road by a person they thought was their long-lost uncle, but turned out to be an Australian mass murderer on the run with nothing more than 3 sets of clothes and a sharp knife, bought a beautiful little handbag puppy, which they named after their late sister, only for it to die a day later of a puppy farm disease, leaving them heartbroken and with 5 Diamante collars that they now had no use for. They left with self-esteem so low that they went for implants in someone's garage at a housing estate, which burst and became infected and ate away at their flesh like an internal breast-eating zombie. Her life had been boring, but it hadn't been bad. There were 3 weeks left now, or thereabouts. There was no concrete date, and no one was willing to fund or conduct that research for that now. There were doubters, of course, but it was already raining, and that was enough evidence for most people to be convinced and worried. Louis had wanted to go on a cruise, had mentioned it over supper almost straight away. Rose had laughed out loud, more unkindly than she'd meant to. Asked him if he thought he was Noah, if he thought his IT-based new money made him worthy of the grandeur. It had hurt his pride, and he defended himself, saying he was only trying to keep her safe and keep her in luxury. Rose backed down and thanked him for the sentiment, but declined. She believed it would happen, but she struggled to raise the passion that her fellow citizens conjured up with ease. It was happening, and there was nothing they could do. And it wasn't personal. It wasn't like she would miss anything or anyone would miss her. It was the best way, really, a full switch off rather than a slow decline. More people should see it like she did. It surprised her how many people stopped working. Chat shows cancelled because the host didn't show up. The department store running on a half staff and closing early for fear of looting. The coffee shop serving espresso only because there was no milk now for her usual latte, dairy farmers having long since given up. Rose found it all nonsensical. There was little point in doing anything other than carrying on as normal. The need to make memories ridiculous, given they'd be forgotten soon. She didn't have a job, but she would have gone to it if she had. Louis had always had a thing for home security. Multiple locks on the door, each kite marked and fitted by a professional. The door itself, some special material he'd had imported from America, bulletproof. CCTV, which made Rose feel violated rather than secure. Home alarms that had to be deactivated when you got in with a 6-digit code that Rose could never remember, much to his distaste. Rose could be accused of being emotionless at times, but she took great pleasure in how useless a home security system was against torrential rain that was set to flood your planet and end civilization once and for all.
Fantastic, Amy. Thank you very much. Another brilliant story, and someone put in the title, yes, Emma, a fantastic title. Yes, I love an interesting title that gives us lots of information about the story before we get it. So great work with that. Thank you. And thank you for a wonderful reading. Now, our next reader is another journal contributor, Andrew Senior, who I don't think has made it in unless you've snuck him in, Andrew, without me noticing. So Andrew is the author of one of our journal pieces this year, The Attendant. So I'll read a short excerpt from Andrew's piece. Andrew is a writer of short fiction and poetry based in Sheffield in the UK. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in Literary Magazine, Potato Soup Journal, Flash Fiction Magazine, and The Honest Ulsterman. You can see more of his published work at his website, which I will paste into the chat for you now. There we go. And I'm going to read a short selection from this story, which is called The Attendant. He believed in the power of art over everything else. The snow covering the track was untouched, wending its way past a solitary house with closed shutters and beyond through fields until it was out of sight. The muted silence rang in his ears. The chillness numbed his face. Instinctively, he squinted in the watery sunlight. The trees before him were bare. There was just one more thing that he thought the painting required. The double doors swung open and a tall man and a lady entered the gallery, both smartly dressed, on a late lunch, most likely. With a serious expression on her face, the lady studied each painting they came to. She wore a dark red coat and knee-length brown boots that clicked softly on the laminate flooring. The man, who was looking down at his phone rather than at any of the artwork, was obliged to keep stopping to let her catch up. He looked annoyed about it. The lady stopped in front of the snow scene. I love this one. It's my favorite too. They turned and the man glared down at the attendant. Then he looked at the lady and saw that she was pondering the attendant with a faint smile. Slipping his phone smoothly into the inside pocket of his coat, he spoke in a voice that boomed around the gallery. I did a history of art degree. Did you? I never knew. Moved to law after the first year. Realized there was no money in arts. No offense. The attendant felt an overwhelming desire to pick up his chair and swing it as hard as he could into the man's artless and ignorant mouth. Instead, he said politely, "Not much money, no." "You get to look at these paintings every day," said the lady, glancing up at the man, her face serious again. "It can't be so bad." It struck the attendant that the lady would do perfectly. He nodded. "I do get a lot of satisfaction from it, yes." "We should get back," said the man, placing a hand on the small of the lady's back. As they were leaving, the lady said something with a quizzical expression. The man gave a derisive snort, and the lady blushed and lowered her head a little. The couple left the gallery, and the attendant went to his chair. After a short while, the lady reappeared, alone. She came near to where the attendant was sat and stopped in front of the snow scene. "I just wanted one more look," she said in a quiet, determined voice. "Be my guest." "It's just so beautifully captured. I want to go there. I can almost feel the place." "I know exactly what you mean," said the attendant, standing up. "That would be some escape, wouldn't it? I think it's to do with the way the artist has used different tones of white, like here." The lady stepped closer to examine the area of the canvas where the attendant was pointing. He knew he would not be able to stop himself now, the overwhelming desire to demonstrate the power of his belief. And I'll leave that there and let you read the ending. A very, very interesting ending. So if you're watching this on the recording, Andrew, thank you very, very much. Okay, perfect. So our penultimate reader for this evening, and we've been absolutely flying through them, is Jean Gizmovic, who I've definitely seen somewhere on the list. Author of La Colonia and one of this year's journal contributors. So Jean lives in Westchester in New York, where she works as a director of special education. Her writing has appeared in the likes of Herb Magazine, Lavender and Lime Literary, and is forthcoming in Tamarind. She is currently working on a novel about New York City that examines themes of memory, time, and climate change. So I'll hand over to Jean without any further ado.
Hey, thank you so much, Ross, and everybody who's still hanging in there. So again, this is an excerpt, takes place in a speculative version of New York City where the past and the future meet, and our hero today is Jose Marti, the Cuban revolutionist and activist and writer. Okay. Time moved differently in La Colonia as the young who could not forget cared for those too old to remember. It was perhaps this very confluence of memory that nurtured the fomenting mind of Jose and his fellow philosophers. Most days were the same. Jose would wake early and prepare café con leche and buttered toast in the quiet morning, wary to disturb his wife Carmen, who relished the extra 15 minutes of the bed to herself. As he dipped the toast into his coffee, he would work on his poetry. He let his verse off its leash, knowing that if it had more slack to sniff the corners of his mind or laze about in the sunny spots of the room, it would return to him with some prize in its mouth. His wife would later sweep the crumbs and pencil shavings off the table, gently shaking her head and think to herself, "That man's got more secrets than a woman." Jose taught during the day and worked in the nursing quarters from 4 until midnight. He liked to catch the afternoon sun glinting between the buildings as he walked down the avenue. He would pin his eyes to a spot on the river and focus, pixelating its many colors until he found a new shade. Then he would take a notebook, careful not to worry a larger hole in the seam of his back pocket, and paint the color with his words. It was the same river every day, but each day, something different. Jose was nimble on the planking that took him to his second job. The soles of his weathered wingtips were soft, and his step was light. The poet was 5 pounds shy of gaunt, with a bushy black mustache that put his larger-than-average ears into more proportion. He had a receding hairline and eyes that conveyed their milky lucidity, like a pair of old marbles. After delivering the clearing the evening meal, he would retire to an empty room and write his manifestos. Jose knew there were more like him who yearned for independence, who believed that a man should have access to land, a proper education, and equal recognition under the law. His words had gotten him in trouble before, and this time he would take careful steps to avoid a second detainment. His digestion still nursed idiosyncrasies from the time he had spent in Newgate, and now he had Carmen to care for. Often within the first hours of sleep, one of the graying men or women would awake during the lighter moments of cycle, still half dreaming and disoriented. He would rush towards the sound of their cries and carefully guide them back to slumber, staring at their graying hair and pondering their fossilized minds, the papery and mottled skin so thin against their bones. He did not want to die in the dark like this. He would die with his face towards the sun, fighting. When the shifts changed, Jose would gather his papers and carefully fold them into his notebook. As he walked back to the small flat above the former gallery he shared with Carmen, he could feel the cooler air off the river lift the warmer air that had settled against his skin, and it felt like something new, shifting his thoughts to the present. I could hide them, he thought, in layers. He would imbricate the message in his verse, like secret writings rolled in the leaves of a cigar. Hide them in the pages of books that no one read anymore, that were dead to most New Yorkers as the statues of the once great men that littered the parks and corners. He would write for the children of a golden age from which their people came from. Through his words, they would come to understand their homeland, and they would see their humanity. Breaking through the rhythm of his reverie, Jose spotted a white rose growing amongst the sea oats and Culver's root. The blossom was not native to the avenue and must have been put there purposefully. He liked the way the petals appeared to glow in the moonlight like the sands of his island. He thought to himself, after all the fighting, he would cultivate neither thistles or nettles in his heart. He would offer peace, if only they would take it. Walking down the avenue, he felt like he was traversing the canopy of the city. From his privileged perspective, he could see through the windows into the illuminated scenes of domesticity, a family at dinner, an intimate quarrel, a child struggling over their homework. He could smell the aromas of sofrito frying and adobo-crusted meat sizzling in the pan. His people had taken root and grown here too, fresh leaves bursting from their withered boughs. A hope can live both in the heart and in the head, and they too would straddle two shores. Light on the wind, he could make out the traces of a melody. Less than a block from home, he heard the weathered friction of a tune in the throat of his beloved. Carmen always sang while she cooked, her voice like corduroy in the night. He thought of the elderly residents and wondered if they were done with their dreams, and if they could tell the difference between him and the others that would soothe them back to sleep. He took one last look at the Hudson. There were no colors now, just an inky black, soulful in its anonymity. I know you, Jose thought, watching it refract the moonlight. And for a moment he stood, charging her to know him too, to break from her careless monotony of tides and to feel the presence of a man who would one day change them.
That's superb, Jean. Thank you very much. Very, very well read. And there's some beautiful imagery in there. So thank you for submitting. And of course, thank you for coming along and reading this evening too. Okay, excellent. So I wanted to round off tonight's readings with our 2022 mini saga competition winner. So last but certainly not least, we have Stevie Billow. So author of Afterlight and this year's mini saga competition winner. Stevie is a creator and educator currently based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Their work has previously appeared in Meat for Tea, The Valley Review, Beyond Words, On the Run, and The Blood Pudding. They also manage Rotary, a multimedia arts collective on Instagram at Rotary_arts, which I shall paste the handle of into the chat whilst Stevie is reading. So without any further ado, I will hand you over for Stevie for the last reading of the night. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is a short piece, so I'll just get right into it. Afterlight. Like her mother, she does not grow eyes. She scavenges by scent, scuttling amongst the ash and debris. She does not see the crumbling walls, the vines that overtake them. She does not see the shadow people left from atomic flashes. She has 7 blind babies to feed. And that's that. Thank you.
Superb, very short and very sweet and very, very well written and well read. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to wait until the final reading to hear that. Thank you. And everybody, that concludes our speakers for this evening. So thank you all so much for submitting to the journal and for attending tonight to read excerpts from your pieces. Could everybody please join me now in a toast to this year's contributors? And I know perhaps it's a little bit odd over Zoom, but please also feel free to unmute your microphones and applaud and whoop and cheer and whatever it is you'd like to do. Thank you all very, very much.
Well done, everybody.
Well done, everyone. Very well read.
Well done, guys.
It would be wonderful to have a physical launch event, but at the same time, I wouldn't be able to expect everybody to travel to it from so far. So it's much nicer to have everyone here and being actually able to read, even if it's online. So now we've got, yeah, maybe. So now we've got the opportunity. I hope you all enjoyed it, obviously, and thank you for your wonderful comments. I've been reading in the chat as we've been going along. So now we've got the opportunity for some Q&A with any of the contributors, although I know some people have had to duck out a little bit early. We've also got a few of the editors to hand. So myself, Gemma and Dan. Rachel's not been able to make it. And our illustrator, Orla, hasn't been able to make it, but Hannah has joined us, who is our social media executive. So I might spring it on Hannah and ask her to talk about social media in a minute, but I'll give you at least 2 minutes notice. So please feel free to unmute and ask your question, or type into the chat if you prefer, along with who it's for, and I can read it out. I thought, oh, go on, Beck, yeah, absolutely.
Straight in with a question.
Yeah.
You were saying that you had a huge increase in submissions this year, which is obviously fantastic.
Yes.
I was wondering, do you think that is related to the theme, or do you think Superlative is wonderful and news has spread fast? Is it all of these things? Like, what are your thoughts?
I would love to say that it's because Superlative is wonderful and everybody wants to be published in Superlative. And I hope that is at least part of the answer. But I believe the answer is probably twofold, the main part of it. One is the efforts of Hannah, absolutely, and the work, the fantastic work that she's done on social media, because she's done a much better job than I did last year, if I'm brutally honest, because I'm not particularly au fait with social media. So part of it is getting the word out through those platforms. And another part of it actually, and this is a really boring answer, but is the submission process. So actually for the first 2 years of the journal, we accepted submissions via email, which is wonderful and allows anybody to submit from anywhere in the world. And of course, it's free. But this year, we actually made use of the Submittable platform, which you will all have heard of because you will all have submitted through Submittable. And of course, it meant A, the submission process was easier, and B, it extended our reach enormously. So it's a combination of those two factors, and of course that everybody wants to be published in Superlative. But yeah, thank you very much. Good. Straight in with the question.
Yeah, cheers.
Emma, thank you very much.
I'd certainly say, by the way, that Submittable makes life so much easier.
It does.
Because you've got all your details entered before you start, and all you have to do is upload a file.
Yeah.
And the number of magazines where they say, can you reformat it like this and then send it to us like this?
Yeah.
And I want the title to be like this.
Yeah.
And you just find yourself thinking, at some point, I can't be bothered.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
It's just so easy to just say, right, I'll send it, because I've got loads of stories and I like to send them out.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I don't want to spend my entire life reformatting them all for how you want them done and how you want the email to be and how you want the subject line in the email to be and all that kind of thing. I just think, you know, do you want my story or do you not want my story?
You're not wrong, Robert, absolutely. And that was a big consideration that I took into account after the first 2 years of Superlative. And I came to basically exactly the same conclusion. When I'm submitting, I want it to be quick and I want it to be easy and I want to be able to get them out there. And when we receive the pieces and we put the journal together, it's all typeset anyway. So it doesn't matter whether it comes to us in Arial or Calibri or Times New Roman or however it comes. I just want to read the best stories. Absolutely. So yes, Submittable's made a huge difference. Oh, sorry, was that Dan? Go on.
Yeah, that was me. I was going to chip just because I've just come off the back of like a week of formatting stuff to 6 different things. I think it still feeds off the back of that thing of going like, well, obviously, if you're a true writer, you know, we're going to sort the wheat from the chaff by make them, or you've only done like 1.5 inches borders coming around. Oh, we actually wanted like 1 inch and 16/3 and things. And it's,
I've put together an anthology from my writers group, and some people put carriage returns at the end of lines, and they space paragraphs out by putting extra carriage returns. And there's one person who types the page numbers at the end of each page manually. And I have to say, I have had to kill them.
Oh, yeah. I definitely going through. I mean, I'm horribly dyslexic, and Ross can attest that I treat grammar the same way that Russia treated its satellite states. But there's a couple of times I've looked at things and gone, yeah, bit of Grammarly, bit of spell check wouldn't have gone amiss there.
Well, if it's really terrible, but I mean, yeah, if you just make a typo, you stick a spell check on at the end, you have a quick proofread. If there's a couple of things, I wouldn't be worried if I was judging something. But because I don't think there's any story I've done where there hasn't been a spelling error at some point in it.
Oh, I mean, I'm finishing up reading the novels of Vampire Hunter D, which is cooler than it sounds. But that is an official license translation from Japanese, because I'm doing a one-to-one comparison of them. That's gone through multiple different editors, released officially, and it's still got formatting errors, it's still got punctuation errors and grammar errors. And I'm like, I don't know if the editors did actually go through this. So even with all the best, I think mistakes still get through. It's part of it. But going back slightly, like, I do like the submission methods that we have with Superlative, because it does allow for people to get their work up without being so hung up on, is it perfect? You know, is this formatted the correct way, in which if I haven't done it, they'll throw it away straight away. You know, it definitely allowed.
I think that comes from competitions where they want to get rid of half the entries before you start. And if you haven't formatted it in the exact way they want, they can ditch half the entries.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it comes from. And I don't think, sorry.
No, not at all. I was just going to, I completely agree. That was something that we wanted to avoid with superlatives. I mean, within certain boundaries, we have to take word counts into consideration. So for some of the pieces we were receiving, bearing in mind this is a short story journal, we were receiving submissions that were 50,000 words long, and perhaps that's a little bit too far outside of the remit. However, yes, absolutely, we wanted it to be as open to as many people as possible, and to consider as many people as possible, and like I said earlier on, publish as many people as possible. And some of our stories are the opposite of that. Rather than 50,000 words, they're of course 50 words, exactly, the mini sagas. And Beck was talking a little bit earlier on about her process of cutting her stories down for the mini sagas. And I wanted to ask Beck and Stevie, and I was going to also ask Corella, but of course she couldn't quite make it. So mini sagas are such a different beast to short stories, and even to a certain extent, even though flash fiction is short, they're a different beast again to flash fiction. So, and I know a couple of our other writers also write mini sagas too. So I just wondered if anybody wanted to just weigh in on whether they find mini sagas more difficult to write than flash or short stories, or whether your writing process changes when you write mini sagas. Beck, you were talking about cutting down. Do you go from kind of short story to flash fiction, and then for your mini sagas, do you start them as flash and then it ends up as a mini saga, or?
Yeah, I'm interested in Stevie's answer too to this. So I wrote the Firefly piece originally for a publication, for a festival ages ago. They rejected me, the fools. The theme was glow or something, and it had an entirely different ending. It was still a short piece, but it was about 300 words. And the amount of, I don't know, I'm quite strict. I'm always just like, do I need that? Does it add anything? No, cut it out. Sorry, Ross, what was the question?
That's not a bad thing.
You're all excited. Yeah, that's how I work. I go, not massive, but like quite, 300 words, 200 words, and then I just pick it all the way down. I was very excited by the mini saga word count, because you occasionally get micros at about 100, but it's rare you get a 50, and I thought, oh, accepted. I got very excited. But I'm interested whether Stevie did the same thing of working down, or did you just go, I can just write this in 50 words, like fresh and new? What did you do?
Yeah, for me, it was definitely, I started with the idea of it being 50 words. I mean, I saw the prompt and I thought 50 words. I mean, that's smaller than anything I've written before or tried to write. So I thought it was really appealing to challenge myself in that way. But it's tricky, having to pick every word so precisely. And even reading it now, I'm like, oh man, should I have done this instead of that? But it's such a different process than writing, something that's 3,000 words. But
we did
go ahead. Yeah.
We did an interesting exercise a while back in the writers group I'm part of, where people wrote a 500-word piece, and then they took somebody else's and wrote a 250-word piece, and then halved it to 125, and we kept halving it and trying to make it smaller and smaller. And it was quite interesting to see how people could do it. That because I mean, your 50-word piece really still had power to it. There's a limit to how much you can go, because obviously if you get to 3 words you can't put much in, but it's surprising how much you can cut down if you just keep trying.
That sounds like the best afternoon ever, just sitting there in a circle cutting everyone's down. I'd love that. That's nerding out here.
Well, if you're anywhere near Slough, come to our writers group.
I will do, I will.
Fantastic, thank you. I think sometimes the misconception is, oh yeah, it's a 50-word story, it'll be easy, it's only 50 words.
Oh, it's much harder.
Of course, it's much more difficult, isn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah, you get a 3,000-word story, you can just wibble about with it. You get a 50-word story,
like that, wibble about.
Every single word has to be precise. That's much, much harder. It's like a 5-minute presentation is much harder than a half-hour one.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, and it's been evident in the readings this evening and in all the other pieces that haven't managed to be read in the journal this evening. I was very, very interested when I was studying at university, and still am, I suppose, in the poetics of prose. And I did poetry throughout 3 years of my university studies. And the crossover between poetry and mini sagas, between poetry and flash, and even between poetry and short stories, I think some of the best short stories are some of the most poetic short stories. And I love finding a short story that feels rhythmic like a poem, feels like, exactly like you say, Robert, the writer has put an attention and paid close attention to every single word. Every word needs to carry its weight, and I think that's really important. Okay, fantastic. Does anybody have, I can see a few people are unmuted. Is that because people are waiting to ask questions?
I was just being sociable.
Oh, no, perfect. Sociable is fine as well. No, absolutely. Is there anything else anybody wanted to ask, or anything anybody wanted to add before we close up for the evening or the morning or the afternoon? No. Okay, that's fantastic.
Just a big thank you. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you all very much for joining, obviously.
It's been ace.
I'm going to stop recording.